Good evening, everybody, and let's make a start. Want to declare the agenda briefing open. Today is Tuesday, the 8th of June 2021, and it's just after 6 p.m. at 6:01. We start, of course, by acknowledging the Whadjuk people, the traditional custodians of the land, and also pay our respects to elders, both past and present. Tonight's meeting is for the purpose of asking questions and seeking clarification on agenda items for the next ordinary council meeting. No decision-making or entering into debate is to occur at this meeting. Can I ask everyone present this evening to turn off all electronic devices? That includes mobile phones, iPads and tablets for the duration of this briefing. Tonight's agenda briefing is being recorded, and a copy of the audio recording shall be available on the City's website within 72 hours of this meeting. Agenda briefings are public meetings, and any information you provide may be publicly accessible. Just in relation to disclosures of interest, the prescribed disclosure requirements apply to meetings that are convened under the provisions of the Local Government Act. However, it may be perceived as ethically unacceptable and at odds with the probity and accountability principles of the Act and the Code of Conduct for elected members to participate in forums, briefings or workshops where they are aware they have a conflict of interest and do not declare it. In the interest of openness and accountability, elected members are always encouraged to disclose a conflict of interest where they are aware they have one when attending a forum, briefing, workshop or meeting, and where applicable, remove themselves from the room while the matter is being discussed. At item 2, attendance, we do have a number of apologies. Councillor Porter is unable to be here this evening, as is Councillor Kunza. Both provided written notice that they were unable to attend this evening's meeting. Approved leave of absence at item 2.2, there are none. CEO, disclosures of interest, are there any?
Thank you, Mayor. I've received a declaration from Councillor Bain. It's in relation to item CD 018-21, which is the request to waive planning fees, proposed extension of the community purpose use at 1430-1432 Albany Highway. It's a impartiality interest. His position as an elected member, Councillor Bain, is a member of the Station Street Men's Shed, and he seeks to remove himself from the meeting when this item comes up. Is that correct?
Yep. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, can I just have your attention just for a moment? I noticed the CEO didn't read out my conflict of interest for the item dealing with the Wilton Basketball Association. I did declare it at the previous meeting, and I thought, I haven't filled it out tonight, CEO. I thought it would have carried over to this meeting.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Separate meeting, Councillor, so just complete a new form and hand.
Okay, I'll do that now. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Stacey, can I grab a form as well, just for the purpose of the record? I'm a former member of the Horticultural Society and Ag Society. I don't think I'm a current member, but nevertheless I'll declare an impartiality when we get closer to it. At item, let me see, item 4, question time for public. Item 4.1, response to previous questions are taken on notice. A response to previous questions taken on notice will be noted in the ordinary council meeting agenda. Questions from the public. The time set aside for public question time is 15 minutes, which may be extended if necessary. A question must relate to an item on tonight's agenda. For recording purposes, please state your name and address and then proceed to ask your question. If an answer cannot be provided at tonight's meeting, the question will be taken on notice and an answer will be provided at the next ordinary council meeting. In accordance with policy AD02, members of the public who have registered their interest to ask questions with the City's administration shall be called upon in the order in which registrations were received. I now open public question time at 6:05 p.m. and note we have a question, a number of questions here from Mr. Steve Walker. Mr. Walker, can I ask you to please step forward?
Steve Walker, 22 Farnham Street, Bentley. Apologies for not getting the wording in. These are in regards to the agenda item endorsement of Safe Canning Strategy. Question 1. Why was there no fuller effort addressing the submissions and giving answers to the questions in regards to the April 2021 call it the engagement? I've got it. Yeah, the draft strategy.
I'll just get you to reframe your question, Mr. Walker. What was it? So why?
The question was what? There seems to be there's no full effort. Seems to be why was there no full effort addressing the submissions and public feedback and the answers, giving answers to those questions from the public feedback in regards to the efforts of the public in replying to the April 2021 draft strategy.
So your question would be, what was the effort that was taken? Yeah, let's have a look at Director. Can I get you to address that, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for the question, Mr. Walker. We received 30 responses to the strategy when it was put back out for community consultation. City officers reviewed all feedback and where practically included that feedback into the updated version of the strategy. And prior to that, during the community consultation that commenced late last year, ran through to early this year, we also used that feedback to inform the draft strategy.
Mr. Walker.
Question 2. Why is the non-core supplementary service a luxury service, a budget extravagance, the 7-day-a-week ranger service and the 24/7, as dubbed here, the community safety service? It's 3.65 million in the 2020 to 2021 budget, constantly accepted as business as usual, as stated in why?
Director.
The city has run a 24/7 community safety service for a number of years, and each year it is presented as part of the annual council budget for adoption. The service provides valuable support to our community, and feedback from our community in response to the service has been positive, hence why the service continues to operate.
And your final question, Mr. Walker?
Question 3. Given the media releases of City of Canning being in budgetary deficits for the past decade and more, when you have an annual budget line of 3.65 million for these 24/7, these ranger services, was that budget line, is that taken into account when looking for reductions in annual expenditure across the long-term financial plan? So I'm asking if and how.
Director Kane, are you able to answer that question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'd be aware, Mr. Walker, that the City Security Service is fully funded by the security levy that's applied as a charge to each household. So it has net zero impact on the budget deficit. The provision of ranger services, which is something that all local governments do in order to meet their regulatory and compliance requirements. Every position in the organisation is reviewed each budget cycle. We're doing that just today in order to work out whether there are reductions or efficiencies can be achieved, and they'll be taken up in this year's annual budget.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for coming along, Mr. Walker. Appreciate it. Thank you. Do we have any other questions before we close public question time? Mr. Aldridge.
Good evening, Council. Richard Aldridge, 5 Minotra Avenue in Shelley. My first question is the City going to install CCTV cameras at Chapman Park, Warwick Park and Wyong Reserve, which were identified by the City as being in areas of need for the temporary CCTV?
Director, I think we've got some real problems with applying CCTV at the moment, haven't we?
I'll take the question on notice. Thank you.
Mr. Aldridge, your second question.
How many companies in total did the city staff approach for quotes for the irrigation of the Whaleback Golf Course? And how extensively was this multi-million-dollar tender advertised to only end up with one tenderer?
Director?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. To this end, all tenders are advertised extensively. This is specialist work in this area, so we weren't surprised in the end that there would be a limited number of tenders. The normal process is prior to going to tender, the city initiates a process to estimate the full cost using quantity surveying. So once we did that, we actually had a benchmark which to be able to evaluate the tenders. We were comfortable. The price came in close to what we were after. And then after going through a process of removing a couple of items which were supplementary to what we have a good value for money in this response.
And your final question, Mr.
My last question is, was the successful tender a Wooga certified or Wooga preferred quote stroke tender person?
Director?
Thank you. There's an assurance process we go through every tender to ensure that contractors who are bidding for work for the city are both financially sustainable and meet quality requirements. The managers in the back, if you wish to speak to him later on tonight, but we're quite happy with both the quality of the tender and particularly the way that the contractor sat with us and worked through each of the areas for variation. Very comprehensive, it'll be a very good firm, and we're confident also that the 14-week construction program will represent the least amount of disruption to our players.
Thank you.
Sorry, a bit of miscommunication. It was specifically, were they Wooga certified? Were they a Wooga preferred supplier?
I'd have to take that on notice, but if you wish to ask Mr Wilkinson at the end of the evening, he'll probably give you an answer directly to that question. Or Mr Mayor, if you'd like to refer that to Mr Wilkinson, he might be able to answer that now for us.
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from the public before we close public question time? Thank you. We'll close public question time now. It's 6:12 p.m. We move on to deputations. Tonight there are none. At item 5, items brought forward for convenience of those in the public, we've had a request to bring forward CO 003 of 21. Directors, that's in relation to the response to the petition regarding community safety, Bentley and St James. So we will bring that matter forward in a short time. Number 6, item 6, reports of committee meetings. There are none. And at item 7, reports of the Chief Executive Officer. At item 7.1, there are none. Let me see. I will bring forward then CO 003 of 21 as the first item. Governance, I'll just get you to bring, we've got that up on the screen. We have. Councillors, the recommendation is on screen. Have any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, a few questions, please. I think in number 7, it talks about the population density, employment rate, education and social economic indexes for the CEFA factor. And I think that somewhere in it says that Bentley was the lowest and St James was the 10th. But I'd like to point out and ask if that could be changed to the fact that out of the bottom 6, 5 of the suburbs were the lowest, and they were all in the Mason ward. So, and that relates basically to that employment rate, education, and whether there's that, as it says in there, the crime correlation. That's probably part of the question. In 10, it says 354 responses were made to the Community Safety Month survey, and 8.7 were from Bentley and St James. The question I ask is that out of that 354, how many were basically from the Bentley St James area, and where did the others come from? I mean, are they all City of Canning residents or not?
Director.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Barry. I'm looking to our Senior Manager for Community Safety. I might need to take that one on notice and come back to you, and we can provide I'll ask Mr Shane Mallon to accept that.
Mr Mallon, do you have that information at hand?
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. That information, Councillor Barry, was emailed to you all by me on the 2nd of June, 5:16 p.m, and captures the full percentage of community safety survey respondents by ward. So the Mason ward was 15.4%, and that's on your email.
And the rest were all-
Just your microphone, please, Councillor.
and the rest were all from City of Canning, Willetton, Canning Vale, etc., etc.
Yeah, so it's all detailed in your email.
And was that June the 2nd?
So I emailed it on 2nd of June, 5:16 p.m, and it captures all City of Canning suburbs and grouped into ward.
Okay. Sorry, in relation to point 12, has the city had any collaborative work apart from the surveys that we're doing next week or something, I believe, with the town of Victoria Park in relation to the problems that are encountered in the Bentley St James area, because there is an overlap of the suburbs into Vic Park,
Director.
Canning.
So with regard to collaboration with the town of Victoria Park, the city does work throughout the region, throughout the corridor. As the report details, responsibility for community safety is a collaborative action. It doesn't just sit within the local government borders. So we have had engagement with them. We have run some of our community safety awareness sessions with them, and as outlined in the action plan, it is the intent to run more of those, and if that does cross over on those boundaries, then we will do that. Item 12 in the report details specifically in relation to street lighting. I'm not sure whether we've had any collaboration with our partners.
Well, apart from we're getting the new Western Power. I know
That's
that.
exactly
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
aside from that work.
Okay, further question, and probably this is in relation to a question that was asked by a member of the public just a while ago. With the holiday watch, does that impinge anyway on the rosters, or how does it work? Because you won't go past the same place every night because the suburbs are big.
I'll ask Shane Mallon.
Mr Mallon.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So yeah, the holiday watch patrols are captured as part of our standard operations, and we have the capacity to incorporate them into our standard shift coverage. If you're not aware, we cover the district in patrol zones, which enables us to conduct that service as part of standard operations.
Anything further, Councillor?
Yeah, 26 it talks about graffiti. The question there is how do residents apply? Because I noted that at that last meeting I was at, there was some questions asked on that, and because of there's been an increase in graffiti in the Bentley St James area as well. So how do residents apply for such a, and who would they speak to?
Director.
Councillor Barry, I'll take that on notice and we'll come back to you via email.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors, before we move on? None. Councillor Bain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in regard to paragraphs 23 and 24, what measures or what local laws can the city implement to compel people to address an unkept verge? Thank you.
Director. Director Bowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to have a crack at the question. Certainly there is local laws which prohibit certain activities being undertaken on the verge or certain obstructions being put on the verge, and our rangers, as I'm aware, undertake some advisory work in the community where grasses and weeds become overgrown to such a height that they become an issue for sight distances on corners for vehicles travelling that area. But as far as unkempt in relation to overgrown of vegetation, unless it becomes a sight line, I'm not sure there's any local law provision that enables us to undertake that work.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Barry?
Just in relation to what Councillor Bain was talking about there with the verges, will or does the city intend to have a register for verges as opposed to just due process of mowing like the old 6-week cycle or not? Thank you.
Director, do you understand that? Director?
I don't know how that actually relates to the SAFE strategy itself. It's not something that we would manage as part of the community safety strategy. I am happy to follow up, though, with the relevant business area and come back to you via email.
Thank you, councillors. Let's move on then to the next item, which is 7.2. It's CC 025 of 21. It's a late item, review of delegations of authority 2020 and 2021. The responsible officer is Director Stephen Kane, the Director of Canning Corporate and Commercial. The recommendation is now on screen and is also on page 2 of this evening's agenda. Are there any questions in relation to that before we move on? None. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CC 026 of 21. That's the proposed pedestrian access way closure and road reserve dedication at lot 3090 Wirralanda Way in Parkwood. The recommendation is on page 7 of tonight's agenda and is also on screen. Do you have any questions in relation to that laneway closure? None. Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CC 027 of 21, proposed disposal and sale of a portion of number 22, being lot 301 Elizabeth Street in East Cannington. The officer's recommendation is on screen and it also forms page 14 of tonight's agenda. Are there any queries in relation to that? Councillor Barry, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, we are on Elizabeth Street, aren't we, yeah?
I beg your pardon?
Yes, no, it's all right. Just in 10, it talks about the price of the land and the size of the land on the basis of a special value. I mean, where does special value actually come from in the real estate jargon?
Is that a valuation term, Director? Are you able to provide some context around that?
Mr. Mayor, I'll take that on notice, but I could simply point at this. As you notice, it's not a complete lot. So therefore, you have to establish a valuation for part thereof of a lot, which is something outside of what would normally be the case when we value a parcel of land. But if you want to know the mechanics specifically, how that turns special, I think it's predominantly in relation to the fact it's not a complete lot. You have to work out an appropriate per square metre rate that be applied for this tiny parcel of land.
Okay, so the next question may somewhat go to answering that, but I'll ask it anyway. So the price was $95,000 for 375. And being the special value, I'm not quite sure whether that's up or down, because that comes out to about $250 a square metre. Is that just about the going rate for POS land when we compensate?
Director, are you able to answer that question?
I'll have to go back. A POS land when we compensate will vary per location based on the global value of the land in the area. We did take some fairly extensive time to look at this one. The original valuations came in at $75,000, but because there was going to be an uplift in net value to the lot, when we went back to the valuer, they increased it to $95,000. So I think this represents certainly more than fair market value for the parcel land. Note too that it's got no other use for us. We can't dispose of it in any other way, but it does provide the value added for the landowner.
Okay, next question is on point 17. On page 17, it says, Councillors advise policy CMO 16 is under review pursuant to the resolution made in 15th September 2020. And the question I'll ask there is that it basically says that we haven't changed that. So what we changed as a resolution in CC 050, is that current or not? Because of we haven't changed the...
Are you able to answer that question, Director, or would you need to take that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As noted in the next line, given the review is not complete, the existing policy provisions shall be given due regard. So until Council's considered it and adopted a variation, we have to apply the existing policy.
But didn't we in CC 050 adopt the new land utilisation plan? Which was subject to CM 106
Director,
being revoked?
Director.
I'm happy to take that on notice in terms of the relationship between the two and come back to council in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barry. Any other questions in relation to that item? Just your microphone.
Sorry, with the next one, which is the award of the irrigation contract, and in relation to the waste disposal contract, these both have confidential attachments to them that I'd like to ask questions on. So is it possible we can take those to confidential?
I'll deal with this one. We'll just close this one off. If there's no
Yes.
further questions on this one, we have. Councillor Sweeney, we're just dealing at the moment with the lot in East Cannington. That's what your question's about? Yep, go ahead. And then I'll come to you, Councillor Barry.
Yes, thank you. I just got a question for Director Kane. Is there a reason why we use McGee's for the valuation and not look at somebody closer within the City of Canning, a local valuer?
How do we choose our valuers, Director?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. McGee's are well credentialed. We actually use 3 valuing companies to obtain price valuations. I can't tell you why we've used McGee's for this particular one, but I've had my personal experience. I've had excellent service from McGee's, and in terms of the capacity to produce valuations.
Thank you.
So if they're well credentialed and we have them locally, we can use those? We can use those valuers, can we?
We've got a panel, I think we use, don't we? Yeah, Director, you want to provide?
Yeah, so there are a number of valuers who we use, McGee's and others who are on the Walga panel. You may have noticed, I think for the land items previously bought, I know this year we've used CBRE to do some of the land valuation. So it hasn't always been McGee's. Often we'll get 2 valuations if there's a significant variance. So some of the stuff we did in the Canning Vale area recently, we obtained 2 valuations, one from McGee's, one from CBRE.
Yeah, I think, Director Kane, where I'm coming from actually is just more from the point of supporting local business in everything that we do. And if we can, even through valuations, and if they're credentialed correctly, then I think we should make every attempt for that. And so that was the point of my question.
Yep, agreed.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Councillor Barry, we shall move on then to CC 028 of 21, the award of contract irrigation in relation to the automatic irrigation system and pump station. A number of the attachments are confidential. You wanted to ask questions in relation to this matter that you feel might touch on some of the items in the confidential side of it?
That's correct, Mr Mayor.
Director, can I ask how we might deal with it?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given that Councillor Barry has also indicated there's another tender he wanted to ask questions about, I would recommend that we leave those items to the end of the briefing, allow the public to say farewell, and we can ask those questions behind closed doors.
Okay, so we'll put off CC 02821 in its entirety, and we'll deal with that under confidential, as a confidential matter later in the meeting. Can you just remind me, Stacey, when we get to that? Thank you very much.
And
yes,
as Director Kane said, and also EN 1121, that's the waste disposal contract. I have a question on that.
I have no issue with that at all. Yeah, no problem at all. Okay, so there'll be both of those matters governance. Thank you very much. We'll move on to CC 030 of 21. That is a late item. Again, budget review as at 31st of May 2021. The officer's recommendation is almost on the screen. There we are. We have it now, and the recommendation also forms page 16 of the late items agenda. Councillors, any questions in relation to that item? Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question on page 21, point 14, operating expenditure. There's a reduction of 270,000, but one says that the city received from the supplier for urban footprint project paid in a previous financial year, but now not proceeding. I'm just wondering, did we anyway no breach of contract or anything there? Because
Director Kane?
No, Mr Mayor, there was no breach of contract. There was I think that had originally been grant funded. For the work to be done didn't proceed, so therefore we have to reverse the transaction, but it has no net real impact on us.
Director,
that's
Councillor Barry?
sorry.
That's all right.
from the previous financial year, so there's no encumbrances that we couldn't. No, all right.
Director?
No.
Sorry.
No, the answer is no.
In 17 of capital expenditure, I think it's a question that's come up before, but I'll ask it again. Relocatable pop-up skate park in Willetton, which is coming out of the LRCI fund. Now, we've already got that. So are we going to, we've spent the money, and are we going to just take that money and they pay us back?
Director Bowe?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to take that question on notice and provide a written response to Councillor Barry.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Councillor Barry.
And just one last one.
Just your microphone, please.
In 28, the comment says further accounting for the 2019 balance day adjustments and year-end transactions may in turn impact on the estimated 2021 budget. Is that correct? That we're still waiting on figures from 1920 to work out what happened with the budget this year?
Not from 1920, I hope. Director Kane?
No, we had
1920,
so we have the 1920 balance day adjustments, which came through September, October last year when you did the budget or finally adopted the accounts, noting at that stage the city's deficit went from 1.3 to 1.7. It merely indicates the same thing with a range of transactions which we have at the end of the financial year that will may finally end up alter the position for this coming year. Yes.
Mayor, I do possibly have some questions in relation to the business unit summary, but given the fact that I asked Mr Kane and he's supplied a legible version, I may have to save those questions till next week. But other than that, thank you.
Well, we're going to be on this item for a little bit. Do you want to have a quick look and see if you've got any questions?
Happy to have them in writing, Mr Mayor.
That'd be an even better idea if you could provide them in writing before the meeting so we can get those answers to you. Councillor Barry?
Yes.
Terrific, thank you. Look forward to seeing those. Councillor Bain, I think I had your hand up first and then I'll go to Councillor Ponaturo. Councillor Bain?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can the city confirm if the upgrade to the sports lining in Wilson will occur at both Centenary North and Centenary South as part of the LRCI grant? Thank you.
Director Bowe?
No, I don't believe it's for both of those projects, Councillor Bain, but I'll confirm in writing for you.
Thank you. Councillor Ponaturo?
Thank you, Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just have a couple of quick questions. With the rates revenue, on the operating revenue as of 31st of May, so we have actually made more money. How does that happen? Because we adopted budget 69,066,940, but we have actually then revised and proposed to 69,219,847, but we got 69,3 or 69,740. So I mean, I'm very happy to have that that we have actually received a bit more than what we even anticipated. But is it accrued or is it actual?
I think it's in the...
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As you'd notice in paragraph 13 of the report, the majority of the variations all relate to planning revenue. That's the consistent area of uplift for us. Whilst there may be a minor variation additional for rate revenue, we will always throughout the year receive interim rates as we consistently go through right to the end of the year. But as the most of the uplift has been from planning revenue for us.
But is the planning revenue part of the rate revenue? I'm just reading the rates line.
Director Kane?
The first line, the very first line.
Yeah. Mr Mayor, I'm just reading through the proposed budget 69,219 versus year-to-date actual 69.306. There's a minor variation, as I said, of some
87,127.
And that's just a consistent, councillor, where during the course of the year we continually receive interim rates. We don't know when they're going to come back in. development will happen. It's concluded, we received the advice that the development's there, and that there are minor variations to it. So always happy for every dollar extra we can get into the
I'm happy to see $87,000 more in our bank account than not having it. Just a couple more questions, Mr. Mayor. One more question I got on the non-operating grant subsidies and contributions. We had adopted 8.5 million, and then we revised to 13.89, and then proposed 17.2, and then year-to-date actual is 6.7, much lower than what we adopted. So what happened? Any reason we revised to a much higher amount and then we came down?
Director Kane?
So the majority of the non-operating grants, it's always issue of timing for us in terms of the receipt of those funds. So you'd notice things like the LRCI, et cetera, coming through. But I think the report went into some detail, and I'll find the relevant paragraph and I'll forward it to Councillor Ponaturo.
Okay, that's good. Similarly, I noticed, thank you, Mr. Mayor, just a couple more questions. Similarly, on the capital expenditures also, we had adopted 43.5 million, and then we revised for 54.9 and 58.3, but we have only done work for 25.1 million. And just wondering, is it many of the capital expenditure, capital projects are going to be carried forward, or what's going to happen if we didn't spend that much of money,
Director
millions
Kane.
of dollars? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That query is actually answered in the report that deals with the monthly financial statement. You'd find in there includes both a graph and a summary indicating some 70% of all of our projects have been started. Excuse me. There will always be carry forwards because you continually start projects throughout any year. We've had a record number of capital projects to try and initiate this year, but there will be carry forwards at the end of this year.
But we have nearly 50% of the projects getting carried forward. So do you think we might be able to manage the labour?
It won't be a 50% carry forward. So what you're seeing there is the cash position. And not the cash and the accrual position. Again, if we come to the next item and you look at the cash and commitments as a combined item, you will see that there is a significant, as I said, 70% of the projects that have already been started, and we'll do pretty well out of the completion of that.
Any more questions, Councillor Ponaturo?
Yeah, thank you. And I did notice, sorry, because we just got the legible paper only now, so we're able to get some questions. Now, on the digital expenditure item, just coming back. Sorry. So we will, okay. On the digital expenditure item also, I noticed that we haven't spent much money on the operating expenditure and capital expenditure on that. We saved quite a lot because we adopted 301 and we only landed up at 169, so nearly 50%. So any reason, or do you think we should?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I might take that a notice on, but virtually all of the digital experience items that we were intended to get completed have been commenced. Again, I think you'll find, Councillor, it's probably just a timing for the cash payments for those. We did adjust the budget, as you're aware, down from 301 down to 237, so at 170 against the 237 spend for this time, knowing it probably doesn't include the commitments isn't bad, but I'll come back to you with some specifics around it.
Because that's fairly important because we are still in the COVID world and we might want to be in much better digital world in the council. So if you look at the not only GIS, ICT and most of the areas, we have spent less. So I'll appreciate some response on that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Unless there's any questions, Councillor Holland.
Yeah, I just want to get some bit clarity on some of the warrant listings. Is that the next one?
Talking about the next item, I think, Councillor.
That's the next one. Okay,
the monthly financial report. If there's no further questions, councillors, we will close that off and move to our next item, which is CC 033 of 21, and that is the late item monthly financial report of May 2021. And Councillor Holland, I'll go straight to you if you like.
Thank you, Mr.
That's all right.
Yeah, I've got some questions on in the warrant listings, especially some of the tree maintenance services. One of them was for $150,000. Is that normal for a monthly amount, or is that for a 6-monthly period? And plus there's a few more. That's not with Beaver, that was with another company as well.
Director
So-
Bowe?
I'm happy to take that on notice, but our expenditure on tree maintenance exceeds a couple of $1 million a year. So a one-off payment of 100 or so thousand is not significant, but I'm happy to take the question on notice, Councillor Holland, and get the exact details of that invoice too.
Yeah, that'd be good, yeah, nothing. With the current state of the budget that we're in, the thing that worries me is still the temporary staff that we're using, and the amount that we're using there. It's well over, in this one, well over $120,000, and consultants and so on. Are we going to try and cut down that level? We've discussed things like this within the budget and what administration is going to try and decrease
CEO, that might-
their expenditure, but this...
I might ask the CEO to address that one, if you don't mind, Councillor Holland. CEO Arthur Coram.
Councillors, this is a part of a program that we're looking at in reducing our costs. It's in, in terms of our long-term financial plan and the discussions we've had in the budget so far. We have talked about a 3-year plan and how we're going to write the budget. Part of that is reducing our costs across the board, and there are a number of strategies we're looking at. So that's, they're in our sights.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions before we move on? Councillor Barry?
Just a couple, help me understand this. Page 15, non-operating grants, subsidies and contributions. It says the city has received 6.75 million as against the year-to-date budget of 9.93. So is that 9.93 as of today, or when this was printed?
Director Kane?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's always at the time of printing, so this represents a position at the end of May.
Right,
Director
so
Barry?
6.5 and 9, so there's a shortfall of 3.25 million, is that correct?
Councillor? Director Kane, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's just simply a timing issue. So the non-operating grants, we're not expecting any deficiency in cash. We receive in some cases your quit grants, so for instance road rehabilitation grants, will all be dealt with as we complete and quit a project. It's simply a timing matter. There's no expectation that the grant income that we're expecting is not going to be received.
Councillor Barry?
So we're expecting that by the end of June, that extra 3.25 million.
Director Kane, is that the case?
It will depend, Mr Mayor, whether the timing is in relation to the project. So for instance, one of the operating projects was part grant funded and it's a carry forward, then we might receive the cash later. Just to give you an idea in terms of those cash positions, we receive monies at different times. We received advice today, as we do every year, that we're about to receive part of next year's financial assistance grants and delivered in advance of the end of the calendar year. So the cash coming in and cash coming out will depend on the completion of the project, the discretion of the person who's providing the grant, but there's no expectation that the money which we have budgeted won't be received.
Councillor Barry?
So the question then is that if we're going to carry forward the project, we would notify whoever was going to give us the grant to say that don't give it to us now because we don't need it.
Director Kane, is that the case?
It's not a case so much don't give us now. We have to go through a acquittal process and they only give us the money when we submit the paperwork for acquittal.
Councillor Barry?
In the loan funds raised, it says as a result of having sufficient liquidity and the timing of projects where loan funding was required, the city did not draw down on any new loans against the year-to-date budget of 10.42 million. Do we anticipate that we will be drawing down any loans, given in 20 it says due to the rates collection being close to the previous financial year, the city has not had to draw down from the approved lending facility. So basically we're saying there that things have been so good that we won't possibly have to borrow any.
Is that what we're saying there, Mr Kane?
No, Mr Mayor. What we're saying is that in terms of a cash, and if you remember the liquidity chart that we gave to you last month, which just shows how the cash comes in and goes out in the city, my intention is to do another one of those around this year's budget too, so you can see how that we're projecting. Simply, we've had enough cash in the bank in order to meet our needs, so we don't draw down on the loan until we have to. But as we commission each of those capital projects that are loan funded, we need the funds to come in, and that's when we do the drawdown.
Councillor Barry.
And the last one, 37, I mean, it says the current year's adopted budget also had an operating deficit exceeding total operating revenue of 4.53. The budgeted profit on disposal of assets worth 5.5, which means we had a notional surplus position. Is that the case where notionally we're square in the budget plus $1 million in the
Director Kane.
As I said, Mr Mayor, in the previous one, the operating deficit is the operating deficit, 4.5. You might have 5.5 come in from land sales, but they'll all be transferred into the land reserve, so they don't offset your real operating deficit. This is the problem when we are using land sales to try and pretend that we're balancing the books, when in effect what we spend and what we earn, as you see there, is $4.5 million less.
So the question I'm asking then is, and I think might have been Councillor Sweeney asked a question once before about where and when is it the sale of those properties noted as cash in the bank, and I'm just wondering why we're saying the budgeted profit on disposable assets of 5.5 now once again comes into consideration of the item.
Director.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure what you mean by, excuse me, I'm a bit dry in the throat, by consideration of the item. This is just giving you a position at the end of the month. The end of the month, the operating deficit will still be, as said, for the whole year, 4.5 million. The cash coming in from the sale of land, as you're aware, some of the land sales are deferred from the year that we won't receive the cash prior to the end of the completion of the year. The paragraph here is merely to show you, again, emphasise again the difference between an operating deficit and a position and a budget deficit and position. That you can sell assets and appear to be trading well when in fact the underlying deficit is your real operating deficit, which in this case is 4.5 million.
Thank you.
So in 2020, 21, 22, will it appear that we're going to have a bumper year?
Director Kane.
Thank you. We'll get there with the budget, but as one of the things we adopted in the provisions for the new long-term financial plan is not to use land sales as a means of trying to show a notional surplus when in effect it's not really a surplus. So the budget we're preparing now will not include large quantities of land sales to pretend that we're getting a surplus. We will have another operating deficit next year. It will be smaller than this year as long as we stick to the parameters we're at. As you know, Council, we've got a workshop tomorrow night. My staff are still downstairs now working through budget documents, trying to finalise all of the position to be able to present to you.
Thank you. Councillor Ponaturo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick question on the leisurePlex between the Cannington and Riverton. I was hoping to see Riverton will be making more money and more revenue than where I'm looking at Cannington, but it looks the other way around at the moment. Do you agree that, Director Kane? And do we know why we didn't make good revenue at the Riverton? Because I was hoping. Thank you.
Director Kane, just quickly.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Unfortunately, the leisureplexes will never balance their cover, as you know, the full operating cost. I'll get Mr Wilkinson to have a chat to you at the end of the workshop tonight and just to explain to you the relative position for the two. The numbers are the numbers.
Thank you. Yes?
Thank you. But I personally have actually done about 3 years ago some of the works between the Cannington and Riverton. I looked at the Riverton was actually almost in the break-even between the expenditure and revenue, whereas the Cannington had on the loss figure. So I'm not saying they have to make profit. It is not profit.
I just need a question from you though, Councillor Ponaturo. So.
Yeah, I'm getting the question, Mr. Mayor.
We need a question from you. So, yep, what was your question?
Yeah, because what I'm trying to say is I've actually done the full breakdown on each services, and Riverton did show a break even at one point, but at the moment it's looking like the other way around. You know, the Riverton's loss is showing more than Cannington. So that's what my question is, because I'm sure that everyone should know that, just not only me, what something went wrong this particular year. I know it's because of COVID, a lot of people didn't use it, we had to shut down, but what, anything specifically we need to know? It's for the...
I'm pretty certain that's the same question you asked a moment ago, and I think the Director said that the figures are the figures. Director, are you able to provide any more context, or is this something perhaps best discussed?
I'm happy to speak to the councillor afterwards and probably go back to the last item, Mr Mayor, which is the one that dealt with the mid-year budget review, because that should show the net position of each of the facility. I don't know if it breaks it down by the two business units. If I have a chat to you afterwards, councillor.
Okay, and we can share that information with everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That'll be good.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions before we move on? Thank you. We'll move on to the late item, or one of the number of late items. It's CC 034 of 21. The title of this report being, it's an amendment to the legal entity names for proposed land transactions related to Lot 92 Coulson Way and Lot 114 Vulcan Road, both in Canning Vale. The recommendation is on page 2 of the late circulated item, and is also on screen, or part of it's on screen. It's a fairly lengthy recommendation. Are there any questions in relation to that recommendation? Councillor Holland?
Yes, Mr Mayor, look, and I'll say this, I don't think I've ever said it before with anything, but this was far too late for me. When did we get this, at 12 o'clock or something today? I work. There's like 40 pages here. How the heck can I come in here to have a question? I haven't had time to read it.
I guess the reality, though, with that, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's a late item
It's
by
too
virtue.
late.
It is a late item. Well, we've still got a week before the OCM, so we've got a full week to ask questions and to seek advice before any decision needs to be made. So tonight's only for asking questions. If you don't feel you're prepared to do that, that's okay. But it is a late item, and sometimes these things occur. It's popped up now. Better. Oh, of course. Okay.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And look, councillor, I apologise for that. In fact, it was only today we realised that it wasn't in the agenda. I'd completed this item last week, gone away for the weekend. Agenda was built. The item was somehow created and then not copied into the agenda. We still don't know why the software, which we did an upgrade last week, failed to do that. So I've asked the questions as to why. Just by way of background, this item is a very simple one. It simply seeks to add an additional legal entity name to a land sale that council's already agreed to. So when we did the sale to Camco last month for a parcel of land, they advised us they had changed the trading names for their entity when using an additional land transaction. So when they came back to the one we had previously approved earlier in the year, they said, oh, we need to add that name as well. It's simply and because we've already advertised that process, had no objections, and now we're wanting to execute it. They've asked us, can we go back and add the fifth name to the title? That way, the two land transactions, which are located next to each other, are going to the same parties with the same legal trading name.
Thanks, Director. Councillor Holland.
So effectively, Company A/2/3 has now said, look, and they've got the approval from us to buy the land, just come back and said that part of their business structure is going to be now Company A/2/3/4. Is that all it effectively means?
Yeah. Effectively, yes. It used to be called 1, 2, 3, 4, and now it's called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Thank you, councillors. We'll move on to CD 016 of 21, the title being Submission Jandakot Airport Draft Master Plan of 2020. The responsible officer is Mr Graham Bride, the Director of Canning Development. The recommendation is on page 31 of tonight's agenda and is also on the screen right now. Are there any questions in relation to that? Councillor Sabiri.
Thank you. There's just a few questions, maybe suggestions, but yeah, I'll put them as questions. First one is about the non-aviation development and planning. I think this might have been a typo. In part B, should rather say retained rather than contained.
Director, can you see where we are?
Through Mr. Mayor, can I get the paragraph number?
Can you give us just a paragraph number in the left-hand column?
I have to go back to the item. Sorry. It's probably page 36, it's the actual submission. Oh, sorry, page 38. Page
In the
39B. Part
The
B.
city's submission itself?
City submissions.
Page 39?
Yeah.
Did you pick up what the
So it
possible error might
says
be?
contained. It should probably, I'm wondering if it should say retained, if that's a typo.
Is this in B?
Yeah.
Director Bride, can you see that there? If not, just...
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, I can see that, the wording probably retained would be more appropriate than contained. But I'll double check on that and get back to council.
Okay.
Thanks, councillor.
I got a few more.
Yep.
Please bear with me. Also, is the remaining bushland planned to be cleared for more runway? And if this is, and if so, is this acceptable? Because my understanding is that it's bush forever and it's meant to be protected in perpetuity. So, yeah, wouldn't Canning need to be supportive of that fact?
Director Bride?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, certainly all the conservation precincts on the master plan include the current vegetation. There was some clearing done for the aviation expansion, so there's an area in precinct 6 which will involve the future aviation development for the airport. That has already been cleared, so there's no further clearing proposed on the airport estate to accommodate the master plan.
Councillor Saviri?
Okay. I guess the next one is about the ground transport plan. I'll just, so that's page 40. Do you think there should be a general note that any roads shouldn't clear further bushland, especially not in areas designated for protection perpetuity, and should not cut through any wildlife corridors?
Director?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, the alignment of the Jandakot Eastern Link Road has already been set through the Metropolitan Region Scheme. So the alignment of that road has already been approved by the state government. There is obviously an intent by the city and a number of parties, including the airport, to develop that particular road. Where there is any clearing associated with those future roadworks, there would need to be a range of offsets. Certainly the first part of the Jandakot Eastern Link Road is where a lot of the clearing occurred, and that relates to the train station developments. That's already been approved, and I guess we're only proposing to extend it from its current boundary, or the boundary it will be at, in terms of providing access to the train station, all the way through to Orion Road, which is a road which runs into the Jandakot Airport. So there may be further clearing along the route, but that's subject to environmental approvals and offset program.
Thank you. Councillor Saviri?
Thank you. If it's necessary, I guess, to have more clearing, would we be able to ask to include underpasses for native animals, for the native animal movements and safety fencing along the boundaries, to avoid them being killed, and also the boundaries will help guide them through the underpasses? Could we include that?
Director, will that be a consideration?
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, we're obviously looking at the Jandakot Airport Master Plan. So that really is comprised of that whole estate. There is obviously road linkages which will come from outside of that estate into the property. But they are separate proposals in terms of the future construction of the Jandakot Eastern Link Road. Those environmental issues will be resolved as part of that particular construction program. Certainly it's something that's outside of the master plan itself. So there'll be a separate proposal in the future to build the Jandakot Eastern Link Road, and there'll be environmental approvals. And one of those aspects could be an underpass for fauna.
I think the director's saying that would be the time to raise those then. Anything else?
Okay, all right. Thank you. One more, I guess, is, no, I've got another two. about the lighting, and wondering if we could have a note in there about minimizing the lighting as far as practical not for just aviation safety, but also native animals. Would that be part of the Jandakot East Road again? Would that be another plan?
Is that relevant to the Jandakot Airport draft master plan?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, obviously it's probably something that's a technical requirement of the airport. If it's inside their estate, there's obviously safety considerations that would be required. So certainly I could make some inquiries in relation to lighting levels. That's quite a granular issue. We're dealing with I guess, a very conceptual strategic master plan. But we can certainly take that on board and get back to council on whether there is any ability to, I guess, reduce the level of lighting through this proposal.
Thanks, Director Bride.
Thank you. Yeah, that would be good because I guess it's about not just the animals, but also reducing light pollution in Perth in general. Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sabiri. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. I was just looking at the draft preliminary master plan letter, and when it comes to airport noise, we've made mention of it a few times of with the contours, and also we talked about this is page 40 of our notes saying about the aircraft will be replaced. Is there anything else that we could sort of say about that? I mean, I know now that a lot of the flights they do there is basically just laps. Is there any, the question is there anything we can write to say, look, potentially with electric planes, it'll be a lot more quieter for the residents there?
Director
Right. Yep, through Mr Mayor. Certainly the ANEF contour map, which is attachment 2, identifies the ultimate capacity of the airport. So it's a forecast of what is the worst case scenario if all the development in the Jandakot master plan was realised and the number of aircraft that's forecast eventuate. And that works, I guess, on a worst case scenario. As you know, those planes over time will be transitioned to newer models, and those newer models are substantially quieter than the older models. So the ANEF contours that have been predicted represent a worst case scenario over time. As those planes get to the end of their useful life, we expect an improvement. So I don't think we can fast track or dictate when those planes change over, but certainly that every time that happens, there's going to be a positive impact in relation to the future forecast.
Thank you very much, Director. I'll go to Councillor Barry first, and then I'll come back to Councillor Sweeney on my left.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr
Barry.
Mayor. Just a question in relation to what Councillor Sabiri was saying about the underpasses for fauna, so they don't end up roadkill. And it does say in the officer's recommendation too, authorise the CEO to liaise with the City of Coburn and Jandakot Airport in relation to the cost contributions to the Jandakot, Eastern Link Road, Johnson and A-Court. The question through you to Mr Bride, if you can answer it or recall it, in the original plan and the Eastern Link Road, which I think at that time the airport JAH were going to pay for the lot, they had already in there the concrete underpasses. So if we go back and look at that, would that not be pertinent to what Councillor Sabiri was saying, that we basically insist? I think they were mainly for bandicoots, but other animals as well. Thank you.
Director?
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, I might ask Mr Troy Bosich, Manager of Development Engineering, is probably got the most corporate knowledge on some of those previous designs for the Jandakot Eastern Link Road.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, through you, Mr Mayor. Yeah, attachment 3, it does show an underpass link from our Bush Forever site through to the Kenhurst Park site. So that is shown on attachment 3. There's no name there. There's some lines there. Bit hard for you to know about that, but there is an underpass proposed.
Terrific.
To link the two Bush Forever sites.
Yep, it's terrific. Just your
Yeah,
microphone,
where Eastlink Road
councillor.
is written. Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bosic. Or did you want to ask Mr. Bosic a question, Councillor Sabiri, while he's at the podium?
Yes, please, yes.
Mr. Bosic, I'll get you to stay there just for a moment.
So would that include, I guess, would that include the, what do you call it? Railing or fencing to sort of, I guess, guide the fauna to the underpass as well, or?
Through the mayor, yeah, look, there's still a lot of work to be done there. Our cost estimate has taken into account that we need to do a fair bit of work on that and how we're going to achieve it. Obviously, the road reserve is fenced on both sides, but there's still a lot of work to be done at the moment. That's just a few lines on a page, but there is enough budget in our estimate to do a fair bit of work on that and making sure that we can address all of those issues.
Are you obviously happy to hear from councillors about that matter in particular? If Councillor Sabiri's got ideas or questions about that?
Yes, through the mayor. Yeah, look, we'll be bringing some plans back to you to have a look at before we go ahead and construct anything. We're looking at lodging it for environmental approval to EPA to have a look at. But all of those things will be addressed as part of that.
Terrific. Councillor Sabiri?
Sorry, Councillor Sweeney. So that these kind of points don't need to actually be included in the submission that we're making now, is that correct? Through the mayor.
Mr. Bosic?
Yes, they will be. They will be.
It will be, definitely. Thank you. Councillor Sweeney?
Thank you. Yes, I think there's going to be a bit of resistance with this, but I've just got a couple of questions, and you'll have to get back to me, I think, Dr. Bride, and it relates mainly to emergency management. I know this airport at the moment is already the busiest airport in Australia with its movements. If we're looking at doubling the capacity of this airport, I do have some concerns for the people of Canning Vale, and I would like to maybe ask a question, and I said you can get back to me on this, but what can we find out? First of all, can we find out in the last 5 years how many aircraft emergencies this airport's had? And secondly, what are the plans? We're talking about increasing the footprint of this airport significantly in terms of flight movement. What are the plans, or what are the plans to improve the emergency response arrangements in relation to this airport?
Thanks, Director Bright. Are they considerations for this master plan?
Through Mr Mayor, we'll definitely chase that up and get back to councillors in the next couple of days.
We'll get that information back to you. Thank you, Councillor Sweeney. Thanks, councillors. If there's no further questions on that item, we shall move on to CD 018 of 21, and that's the request to waive planning fees, proposed extension for community purpose, in brackets, the Cannington Agricultural, Horticultural. Oh, I skipped one, have I? Thank you very much, governors, for coming across. You should have hit me with a stick or something.
Could someone get the stick, please?
Let me see. Sorry, CD. We'll back up the truck one item. That's CD 017 of 21. The title of that report being Proposed Amendment of Local Planning Policy in brackets LP06 close brackets Design Review Panel and Assessment of Significant Developments. The officer's recommendation is on the screen and also appears on page 45 of tonight's agenda. Any questions on that item? Councillor Barry? Your microphone, please.
1.5. In 5F6, it says remove the requirement for council to appoint the chair and deputy chair of the design review panel instead delegating this task to the city's admin to improve efficiency and align with the city's approach to its other advisory groups and typical practices and procedures used by other governments. The question is that given, I think it's 2 years, everybody on it?
Director Bright?
Through Mr Mayor, yeah, it is 2-year membership for the panels. Yep.
So the question I asked then is that given we would only be doing this once every 2 years, can you tell me what the efficiencies would be?
Oh, I'm not sure do you want to have a go at that? I'm not sure if we're able to do that, but go on.
Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah, through Mr Mayor, I think you're right, it would only be once every 2 years. However, the approach is consistent with how we treat our other advisory groups. We've had a look at a number of other local governments and how they select their panel, and we do have an internal selection panel which is made up of our landscape architects, architects and urban designers, so that there is a good internal panel that would review the credentials of the panel members. Certainly it would probably save around 4 to 6 weeks in administration.
Well, I suppose the only other point that I'd make is that the difference probably between our other advisory groups is that this particular one gets a reasonable amount of money each when they sit. But the other question then is on 21. Says the local planning policy referred to the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and the City of Gosnells for their consideration and comment. Is there a reason why Gosnells need comment on our design review panel policy?
Director Bride.
Through Mr Mayor, yeah, it's because the City of Gosnells, they share our panel. So we've got the City of Canning's design review panel, but the City of Gosnells also use it. So in terms of being a good neighbour, we at least would like to get their comment on any of the changes. We've had some early discussions with them in relation to their policy. They've mirrored our policy, so they would obviously look at potentially adopting our policy once we've adopted ours. So it's only fair and reasonable, given they share the panel with us, to ask for their comment. Doesn't mean we are dictated to, but it just means that we can take on board any issues they have.
Thank you, Director.
Do they share the costs?
Director?
Yes, they pay for all the city's costs in administering the panel, and the time of the panel members are all charged to the City of Gosnells, so they pay for all their items.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Sweeney.
Yeah, just for clarity, Director Bride, through you, Mr Mayor, if I could. Just going off what you were just saying then, actually, does the city put any cost into this to assemble this panel?
You're talking about the selection of the panel?
Selection of the panel.
Director?
In terms of the selection of the panel, there's no real costs except for advertising in the paper on the website, and also some officer time in selecting the panel members. So there's no significant cost in relation to the selection process.
But the whole process, I thought I read somewhere where actually the city does contribute some cost in addition to the application or something like that. Could you just clarify that for me, please?
Director Bride.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor. There is an annual budget for the design review panel. It's in the report. I think it's around $50,000. And currently, the fees that we set are quite low in comparison to other local governments. That was because we were trying to encourage developers to utilise the panel. It's not a mandatory panel. We strongly recommend it, but we can't make people go through it. So in order to make it, an attractive proposition, we tried to set the fees at a certain level. Now that design reviews are almost a given as part of the planning process around the whole of the state, we believe that we need to improve our cost recovery levels. And even the ones that we've set in the report are quite reasonable compared to other local governments. So it's never going to be a complete cost neutral or cost recovery, but we think we need to increase them to get a bit more back from the proponents.
Yeah, and just finally, I just really, just by way of conversation here, Director Bright, I don't understand why it can't be cost neutral, because we're not talking about mum and dad investors here, really. We're talking about multi-unit sites, 10-unit complexes, shopping centres, big business. And I just don't see, I see value in what we're doing here, and I think absolutely we should be doing this, but I just don't see why the city or the ratepayers should be paying for this cost.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Barry.
Director Bride sent through you, Mr Mayor, that the state government, have they not mandated design review panels to local governments, or are they doing their own as well?
Director
like
Bride.
JDAP or something?
The West Australian Government strongly recommends that local governments create their own policies on design review panels, and the state itself has a state design review panel. So in terms of any large or significant developments at state level, they must go through that state-led design review panel. But almost every local government, especially the metropolitan governments now, there's probably about 3 or 4 that are left to go, but the majority of local governments in metropolitan Perth have their own design review panel. So JDAP in particular, if they don't see a design review of a significant development, that could be a reason that they defer the application. So whilst again they're not mandatory, they are very much expected for significant developments in WA.
So
Thank you, Director.
if as a design review panel we make a decision on a project, is that appealable to the state?
Director?
Yeah, well, the design review panel obviously provides advice in terms of whether the design meets a number of criteria. A lot of town planning schemes and a lot of the R code requirements have a lot of discretion around what's good design. So certainly some of those aspects can certainly come to play with a JDAP decision if they don't believe that the discretionary criteria has been met in terms of the bulk and scale and a whole range of things. They can certainly rely on the panel's advice to issue a refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I have a few questions following on from the question line of Councillor Sweeney and the question line of Councillor Barry. If we went cost neutral, would that be possible? And the second question, I know that we're pooling with Gosnells. Would it be possible further to pool with, I know that we've set up that, what's that acronym? It's Gosnells, Victoria Park, SECO. Would it be possible to set up one with them? And so you're pooling 4 councils' resources rather than just 2?
Director.
Yeah, through Mr Mayor, there is, Vic Park have had a design review panel probably the longest in WA. So they've got a very well-established one. As you said, Gosnells shares ours. Not too sure about Armidale, but I can definitely find out about that one. But it could be a possibility in the future to have a consolidated panel across the whole southeast corridor. So that could be something that's part of our SECA activities. We could broach that subject.
Good idea. Yes, Deputy Mayor.
First part of the question, just I put them together and maybe I shouldn't have done that. But at the moment, we're not getting, if my understanding is correct, it's costing us to run the panel. We're not getting 100% cost back. Could you give me an indication of how much we're getting back? So we're putting in $100, we're getting $90 back. Is it a significant amount that we're losing? And would it be possible to say, okay, we're not going to lose money, this is the price, and what would that what would be the flow-on effect of that?
Director, a number of councillors, obviously, as you hear, are taking issues with the cost, and I'm wondering whether we could make, you could perhaps best explain the intrinsic benefit of directing people to the panel.
Yeah, what I might do is...
And, of course, answer the question.
Yeah, I might ask Sergio Famiano to come through. He had a look at the fees so he can tell us how close we are to cost recovery. We might be at 75, 80%, so I'll just get Sergio.
Sergio, good evening. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good question. Look, traditionally, I'll just start off. Traditionally, design review panels have been funded by local governments. So if you look at the majority of local governments, they're actually 100% funded through the budgetary process. We have taken a different tact in actually seeking some cost recovery. To answer your question, though, in relation to how much we do recover, typically we would recover around $600 to $700 per sitting, and it would cost somewhere in the order of $2,000 to $3,000. That's currently at the moment. However, we are proposing to increase our fees, as you can see in the budgetary component of the report. And in some cases, we're looking at doubling our fees.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
It's saying here in item 12 that it's currently $4,000 per sitting.
Yeah.
That's what it said here, not 2 to 3.
That's the highest. That's the most we've paid.
I'm wondering here, you've got, so under the budget, it's $55,000, which is what we're proposing. Is that come down to $55,000 from the removal of the requirement to appoint a chair and deputy chair? Or is that the net, or is that the gross?
Director Bright, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, the $55,000 is the gross. That's how much it costs to run the panel. So there's 5 members on the panel. Depending on the number of items, we have to pay the panel members for their time on an hourly rate. So that's the gross figure for the running of the design review panel. There's obviously income that comes in, which offsets that. But as Sergio said, we're not achieving a complete 100% cost recovery. We're improving it with the fees we're proposing. You can see the fees are quite substantially proposed to be increased. So that 55,000 cost, we may be getting back 35,000 in fees versus around 25 currently.
But it's saying here that 55,000 is set aside annually to cover the operation of the design review panel. So that's net, not gross.
Director.
Yeah, through Mr. Mayor, that's the cost, that's the fees associated with the design review panel members. We can obviously give you the income in relation to the fees, and we can update the report.
Well, how do we make a suggestion that this does, going on with Councillor Sweeney, that rather than just ratifying this, that we do say this should be cost neutral? We're thinking of, or what's deliberating at the moment, to put in a, what is it, 10 grand POS fee on subdivisions of, what is it, over 6 units to recover that. That's over 3 units, that's 10 grand. And here we're getting $147, $250, $500, $750. I don't see where this is good business at all. And we haven't had a chance to have an input in this except for now to ask a question.
Can I ask a question myself, Director, only because I asked it a moment ago and I'm not sure if it's been addressed, and maybe Sergio would be able to address it. This is a small amount of money in comparison to our $130 million budget, but irrespective of that, what other benefits, financial or not, or through efficiencies and savings to the City of Canning and its residents by directing people to this panel? Can you just perhaps provide some context around the benefits of this? I know it might not be cost neutral, but why are we working so hard to direct people to this panel?
Yeah, as I said before, obviously we're in a suburban area. We're not in Claremont, Subiaco, Vic Park, where you get a lot of owner-occupier type development at a higher quality. So it's really important for the likes of both the City of Canning and the City of Gosnells to ensure that the built form in these precincts around Cannington especially, and others around Bentley and other areas with higher density where you get the significant developments, it's really important that we improve the design quality. So we try to ensure that a large number of developments that have got some height, and usually above 2 stories, and other components, go through that panel to really get the experts, and these are architectural leaders in their field, to comment, and they do achieve some quite remarkable outcomes. If I was to show you a proposal prior to lodgement, or the first proposal that was lodged to what gets approved, you would quite easily see the quality change that the panel's been able to achieve. So that's what I said. We do recognise that we need to get closer to cost recovery, and we have substantially proposed fee increases. If you look at $147 for up to 2.5 million, that's going to $550. So it's quite a substantial increase. So we are identifying the need to increase, but I don't think we should go for complete cost recovery, because we then might discourage people actually using the panel. And again, it's not mandatory, so we've got to try to hit a reasonable balance.
So just to clarify then, so what you're saying is that in areas like Bentley and Queen's Park and East Cannington, a lot of these developers are not big developers. They're significant developments for the sake of the panel's terms of reference, but these are not huge developers. So it's in the benefits of the community to get them to the table to work with us because they don't have to, and they may not if the fees are too high. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, as I said, the development around the East Cannington, Queen's Park, Cannington, Bentley areas where there are densities that are approaching medium to high densities. There's a lot of land in those particular suburbs. If we get the design wrong and we get the built form wrong, the consequences, I guess, ongoing for the community can be quite severe. So, as I said, it's a balancing act to try at least get some higher proportion of the cost recovered, but not charge the full cost recovery because we'll then distract people from using it, and we may not achieve the same outcomes that we're achieving at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holland?
I can understand all that, and I can understand the value of the panel too. So we've got no argument there. You're looking at $550 for a $2.5 million development. And you're asking the City of Canning ratepayers to subsidise this. I can't see that. I got your logic, but 550 for 2.5, it's not an exorbitant amount.
Yeah, I don't think there was a question there. Do you want to raise it tomorrow at the budget workshop? Might be more appropriate. Councillor, Deputy Mayor, do you have anything to follow up?
I was just going to get your question answered, but you've already got it answered.
Okay,
so thank you.
Terrific, thanks for that. Thank you, councillors. We might move on then. Thank you for those questions. And the next one is, we're back to the one I preempted, which is CD018. Thank you, Sergio, of 21. Request to waive planning fees, proposed extension of the community purpose use, Cannington Agricultural, Horticultural and Recreational Society at 1430 to 1432 Albany Highway in Cannington. Councillor Bain, I believe that you had a declaration. Did you want to read that, please? It's a disclosure of interest from Councillor Bain.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a impartiality interest in that I am a member of the Station Street Men's, so I'll leave the meeting and won't participate. Thank you.
You don't have to leave the meeting. It's an impartiality. It's not a financial interest. Yeah, okay.
It's true.
I'll also be making a disclosure of interest in relation to this matter. That's for CD018 of 21. I'm a former member of this society. In fact, I might be a current member. I'm not absolutely certain. I'd have to check. However, I'm of course able to exercise my decision-making responsibilities as an elected member impartially and of course in good faith. The officer's recommendation is on page 71 of the late items agenda and is on screen right now. Councillors, are there any questions? No questions, thank you. We will move on to EN00. Oh, Councillor Bain, we'll just get Councillor Bain back. I'll just introduce the next item whilst we're doing that. The next item is EN008 of 21, the title of that item being Loan Funding Agreement, Willetton Basketball Association. Director Warren Bowe is the responsible officer. Are there any questions in relation to this item?
Mr. Mayor, I've got to declare a conflict of interest. So this is the Willetton Basketball.
Have you handed in?
I have placed it in with Stacey, yes.
I'll get you to read that to the meeting then.
Report item EN00821, loan funding agreement for the Willetton Basketball. The nature of my interest, I am a member of this basketball club. Thank you.
Thank you. That's only an impartiality. You only need to leave the room if it's a financial disclosure.
I'm well aware of that, Mr. Mayor. I'm leaving the room.
Okay. Councillor Swinney's leaving the room. We're doing our best to locate Councillor Bain. We can't seem to find him.
Didn't want to go to the toilet.
I think we'll carry on with the meeting and hopefully Councillor Bain will join us shortly. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this item? And just for the record too, the May OCM, OCM being ordinary council meeting, this item was adjourned to the June ordinary council meeting by procedural motion. The recommendation is, as I said, on page 73. Councillor Bain is rejoining us. Thank you, Councillor Bain, of tonight's agenda, and is on screen. Any questions on that item? Councillor Holland.
Look, excuse me if I've missed something here, which could have quite easily be, because it's a big thing. On number 8, should that be now reduced, 8B down to 5? Also, Councillor Sabiri, I think it was Councillor Sabiri deferred the motion. To get feedback from them, I know we got the financials and things like that, but did we get any actual feedback where they said, yeah, 3 years or 5 years?
Director Bowe, is there any
5 years is fine?
There's been some.
Have I missed something here?
There's been some further discussion, I believe, by a
Yes,
number
there
of
has.
parties.
Yeah, there has, Mr Mayor. To answer Councillor Holland's first point, we're unable to amend the main body of the report. The report needs to remain as is, given it was presented in May. The second part of your question, yes, there has been some engagement, and we're having ongoing discussions with the Willetton Basketball Association, including about presenting at next week's ordinary council meeting to put their case forward. But there's been no agreement outside of the chamber, however, the WBA are aware of the amendment that was passed on the floor at the May OCM, so conversations are ongoing.
So they're doing a deputation next week?
They're doing a deputation next week, but they're not. We haven't actually had a. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, that isn't confirmed. The discussions are ongoing with WBA about that.
Oh, okay. All right. Apologise. Councillor Holland, anything further?
Well, if they haven't responded to us, then we take the matter on face value for the way it is now. So it's.
Yes, Director Bowe.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I just need to clarify. It is not that the WBA have not responded. The discussions are ongoing.
So hopefully we'll hear something back by next week. If we do hear something back, are you intending to circulate that to councillors before next week's meeting, if there's a development there or any news on that, or will we just that'll be included in the report?
I think it'll depend on the nature of the response, Mr Mayor, but
Okay.
at this point we have made a suggestion to the WBA that they make a deputation at the OCM.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ponaturo, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but I was under the impression they were coming for deputation today. That's why I wanted to clarify with Director Bowe. So hopefully, fingers crossed for next week. Thank you.
Yeah, well, hopefully they will turn up. No other questions? Thank you, councillors. We might just move on then. We'll get Councillor Sweeney back in the room, please. Governance. Councillor Bain, are you going out to find Councillor Sweeney? Don't forget to come back. We couldn't find you before, so. Councillor Bain's left the meeting for a short moment. We'll move to EN 009 of 21, Sustainability and Environmental Advisory Group meeting, unconfirmed minutes of April 2021 as Councillor Bain re-enters the meeting. The officer's recommendation is on page 80 of tonight's agenda and is on screen as Councillor Sweeney enters the room. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that item? There are none. Thank you. We will move on. The next item was the waste disposal contract. We'll be dealing with that as a confidential matter in a moment, so we will skip that. And we will move to Director Canning Community. We've already done this, haven't we? The endorsement of the Safe Canning Strategy. So that's CO 002 of 21. Title of that report being Endorsement of Safe Canning Strategy, and Dr. Sarah McQuaid being the appropriate Director of Canning Community. Recommendation is on page 97 of tonight's agenda and is on screen. Any questions, councillors, before we move on? No questions? Nothing on that one. Thank you. Let me see. We are up to notices of motion for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting. At item 8, we have CC 004 of 21. There's been youth engagement with Canning's secondary students. The recommendation is on page 80 of the late agenda and is on screen now. Are there any questions on that matter before we move on? Councillor Holland.
Number one intrigues me a bit. We've already got a relationship with most of the secondary schools here with giving them involving young people in local government matters with work experience and all that. We're already doing it now. I fail to see why we've got number one in there at all. I've been told we're doing it now, so I hope
Did you have a question though?
Is that true? Why do we need number one?
Well, that'll be a matter for debate, but Director?
Thank you, Councillor Horn, through you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we do have a relationship with most of the secondary schools, and we've definitely been building on that over the last 12 to 18 months. I think number one there is looking at opportunities to further, would probably be a word we could add, to further strengthen the relationships with the secondary schools, and to, again, further how we can engage them more actively in local government matters.
Councillor Bain, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I see through the rationale one of the threads is influencing curriculum, and obviously that is something that the Department of Education is in charge of. So ultimately, wouldn't their cooperation be needed to facilitate curriculum changes or adaptations? Thank you.
Dr McQuaid.
Sorry, Councillor Bain, could you just reference which paragraph you're referring to, or are you just talking in general?
Yes, so Director, in the rationale from the councillors, it mentions HAS politics, law, curriculum on several occasions, and that's obviously a curriculum issue. So I'm seeing the intention of the councillors there, and for the officers, in response to the officers recommending that further engagement with YAWCA, I was assuming the intention is to influence curriculum as put forward by the councillors. Wouldn't the Department of Education's cooperation be needed? Thank you.
Thank you for the clarity. No, it's not the intent for us to influence curriculum. It's for us to align, and this work does align with the current curriculum. So we would definitely not be influencing theirs, but we would be working in line with the curriculum and in partnership with schools. And YACWA, the organisation that we recommend that we would work with as the peak body, also has a number of those relationships and would ensure that what we are doing does align. So it's not our intent to influence curriculum, but to work alongside it and see how we can bring that along with what we're doing with young people in our community so that they have a better understanding of how local government operates.
Another questions, Councillor? Oh,
Sorry,
Councillor Bain,
Mr. Mayor. Would the city, as a matter of course, seek to contact the Department of Education as well?
Would that be necessary?
We already have working relationships with the department, particularly with the regional group that work here within our thing. So we would be working with them already, as we already currently are, on a number of initiatives.
Councillor Pontura.
No, that was my question, whether our director contacted the director of Department of Education to find out about the curriculum and why are we interfering in state government matters. So that's my question.
Thank you. That's been answered. Thank you. Councillor Barry.
Yeah, not so much a question on this. I'm just wondering whether my nom was just a bit late for the print.
I think it might have been late. It's got to be 16 days clear, I believe. Is that right?
And your nom referenced specifically the OCM for next week, but it would have to be 16 days prior to make it for the agenda briefing.
But we've all got a copy of it. Anything
Sorry,
else?
just a quick question. Did it make this in the time frame, or do you agree?
Councillor Barry's did. This one did. Thanks, councillors. If there's no further questions, we'll move on to matters of confidential items which we put off. So we've got urgent business at item 9. There are none. Confidential matters. We've got a number of matters that we are actually dealing with as confidential. I'll just thumb my way through. Stacey, just remind me which. Let me see. Let's see. No, I don't. Thank you, councillors. I'll just get you to take your seats and we'll just thank members of the public for coming this evening. Those that did, we will be dealing with a number of confidential matters, and I'll just ask governance to clear the room, and we'll make sure those microphones are turned off out there. I don't think so, yeah. I think we have to manually turn them on. They're off? Oh. I'm just trying to find my page, but I think I know it off by heart anyway. There being no further business, I now declare the agenda briefing closed at 8:17 p.m. Thank you, councillors.